I am so thankful the way that First-Plymouth is holding together through digital worship. Lots of churches are doing that, and it's helping us stay together. The pandemic has forced us to reclaim what is most important in life. And I think spiritual community is really important. And so I'm thankful for our digital worship. That being said, I sorely miss our physical worship. We all know that a physical gathering has a sizzle, a collective effervescence, and I miss that so much. Digital worship is great at delivering content. I'm a talking head right now, and I can look right at you, and I can deliver information. But worship is a lot more than information. I miss our gatherings. Do you know, I've noticed one thing about digital worship. It lacks some humor. It lacks that spontaneous playfulness that can happen in a physical gathering. You go to church, you know that at any moment we sort of share spontaneous moments and smiles and humor, and it's hard to do that digitally. It's hard to get any bloopers. You can't plan for a blooper, but you know when we're together. It's those playful things that just happen that make our gatherings so tender and wonderful. I wish I could contrive some bloopers. Do you know, some years ago, I was set to hold a worship with a priest from Croatia. And he was arriving from the airport just before the worship, and it looked like he was going to be late. And right at the last moment, the priest came running in, pulling his luggage with his robe over his arm. We had no time, and I just said, "Welcome to America, let's get in there." And so we had to lead a worship with no planning, no coordination. But it was working out really well. He preached a little bit, I preached, and then we read scriptures and sang songs. Christian worship is deeply similar all around the world. I could barely understand him at sometimes with his thick accent, but we were having a good worship together. Then it came time to offer Holy Communion. And we both went behind the table, and I thought since it was my congregation, I would lead communion. I began, but then right away, he started chanting and kind of moving his arms around and shifting all the plates and dishes and pouring things. It looked like he was making an omelet. I got lost right away, and I'm just standing there, and the congregation could tell I was totally lost, and I saw little smiles, but it's okay to be a little lost together. And I just thought I'd stand there and see what would happen. And he just was doing so much. And then at one point, he took out a box of these big honkin' wheat wafers. I mean, these were big, like silver dollar, gnarly wafers. They looked like Triscuits, really thick. I thought, did he bring those on the plane? Where did those come from? And he put them on the plates. He gave me one plate, motioned for me to go serve one side of the congregation. He went to the other. It was going okay, although people coming through the line, I could tell they were sort of sharing my confusion with me, but it was wonderful. And then I got back to the table. I still had about 20 of those huge wafers. He had just one, and he ate it. And then he looked over at me and he said, "Konsumzahast." His accent was, I can't do a Croatian accent, but it was thick. He said, "Konsumzahast." I didn't know what he was saying, so I said, "What?" He said it again, "Konsumzahast." And then I got it. He was saying, "Consume the host." You see, in some traditions, he came from the old Catholic Church in Croatia, which is independent from Rome, actually. It's its own denomination. And in that tradition, once the elements are blessed, you have to consume all of those. And he was telling me to consume all those wafers on my plate. So I looked at him and said, "You eat it." But he said again, "Konsumzahast." I didn't know what to do. So in front of the whole congregation, I just sat there, or stood there actually, and started to eat every one of these big Triscuit-like wafers. And then I'm taking a glass of the grape juice, trying to wash it down. It looked like a bad happy hour at Applebee's, right? But I could see everyone in the congregation just kind of enjoying the humor to it. You see, somehow in that communion, there was both pathos and parody, humor and holiness. Only a physical gathering can do this. You know this. It didn't debase the Eucharist. It was our beloved ritual, but to share smiles and just a sense of a little bit of lightness of being, it was wonderful. I miss those kind of moments. But digital worship is good in delivering content, and I actually have some content I really want to deliver right now. So listen, I want to talk about Thomas. Now, when I say his name, Thomas, I know you first know him as a disciple. He's one of the 12 apostles. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptic gospels, all mention Thomas as one of the 12 disciples. But they have no scene with him at all. Thomas doesn't speak in those three Gospels. He doesn't appear in any moment. He's just listed. It's in the Gospel of John that there are three wonderful moments with Thomas in chapter 11, 14, and 20. And I think they're wonderful. I want to explore Thomas. Do you know, Thomas was very important in early Christianity, so important he had his own gospel. Did you know that? We discovered the Gospel of Thomas in 1945. It was one of the great archaeological finds. There was an Egyptian farmer going along the cliffs overlooking the Nile. He was actually just trying to gather fertilizer, but instead of cow pies, he found this earthenware vessel, and it contained some papyrus writings. He didn't know what he had, but the antiquities market had been heating up around Egypt, so he thought it might be of some value. He went to a dealer. Unfortunately, this poor farmer didn't get the real money. He sold it, and then it was a few years later that we discovered that jar contained a whole edition of the Gospel of Thomas. We had known of the Gospel of Thomas. It was mentioned in other writings, but we didn't have a whole manuscript. It's an interesting gospel. Some scholars believe it goes back as early as the other Gospels, right around the turn of the first century, even a little earlier. And it's not stories. There's no narrative. It's just a collection of teachings or sayings of Jesus. You should check it out. Some people have even wondered, should it be added to the Bible if it's as early as the other Gospels? I don't think we really need to add any more books, but the Gospel of Thomas has a spiritual power to it. Jesus has these little one-liners. One I love is he says simply, "Be passerby." A little cryptic, but listen, be passerby. I mean, when in life do we need to make sure we keep moving? We're to be a pilgrim people. When are we stuck? When do we need to let go of things and move on? Be passerby. Oh, that's evocative. So there was this Gospel of Thomas, and Thomas was this important figure in early Christianity. Now, in the Gospel of John, he's called Didymus Thomas. Now, Didymus in Greek means twin. Interestingly, the name Thomas in Hebrew also means twin. So there's this extravagant redundancy in the Gospel of John. He's called twin. So the early church wondered, who's his twin? Get this. There was a section of early Christianity that thought Thomas was the twin of Jesus. What an evocative idea, that Jesus Christ had a twin. The Gospels mention that he had brothers and sisters, and the early church thought Thomas was the twin of Jesus. I don't know about that, but as I read the Gospel of John, it becomes clear to me that he is a twin. He's our twin. That we see him go through a journey that each one of us has to go through. He's our spiritual twin. Let's go through the Gospel of John, chapter 11, 14, and 20, and see this journey that Thomas is on. But let me back up. In digital worship, I can deliver content. To get ready for that, I want to deliver some content. There's a writer named Bernardo Kastrup. He's a computer scientist, but he writes a lot on consciousness. He dabbles in philosophy. And I want to explain something using his type of words. You see, you're having a life. And in your subjective experience we call life, there are basically two realms you're navigating. You have your inner realm of emotions and thoughts, and then there's the outer realm of perceptions of things in space-time universe. There's these two basic realms, or you could say me and not me. Those are the two basic distinctions, me and not me, or inner and outer. Now, Kastrup believes in the world of space-time, what you're seeing, he calls images or interactions. An image is like a rock, and if you see a rock rolling down a hill, that's an interaction between two images, a hill and a rock. And then you are perceiving those, but get this, your perception is actually internal as well, right? You're the one giving some interpretation to that. And here's what Kastrup emphasizes, that you must have some code, some method of interpreting those images and interactions. And it's those images and interactions that can elicit feelings in us, affectations and intellectual ideas, but you must have some code by which you interpret. Now, what's happening out there is called consensual reality. So when you go to a theater, we all share that consensual reality of a movie, but we have our own emotions and thoughts and interpretations. So we have some code to create an interpretation. For example, if you get a promotion at work, if you feel that that's part of a life well lived, well, then you must have some code that power and success and status matter, right? That must be part of your code if you think a promotion is important. Or say if a loved one dies and you feel a despair almost, well, that must be a code if you don't think there's any life after, or that you'll never see one another again. But that's a code of some sort to make that interpretation. Kastrup is trying to emphasize that we live by these stories we hold in our head. They create our whole life, this code. James Hillman, a psychologist, had what he called an acorn theory. He believed everyone has a destiny, everyone. Like an acorn has a blueprint within it to become an oak, and that you have this destiny, this blueprint. But your stories or the code you tell yourself, those interpretations you're living in, will either help propel you towards that destiny or hinder you. That's how important these are. Okay, I just delivered some content, and now we're ready to watch Thomas. I think on his journey, we see him change his code, his interpretation of life, and he fulfills his destiny. In chapter 11, Jesus asks the disciples to go with him to Judea, where he will raise Lazarus. They're afraid because they know Jesus had been, people had tried to stone Jesus in Judea, and they were afraid, and they're not understanding his spiritual teachings and him wanting to go there. But at the end of that passage, Thomas says, "Come, let us go with him and die." Now, Thomas isn't understanding. He's confused like the disciples. Jesus isn't going there to die at that moment, nor are they. But that one line spiritually almost sums up the gospel. Come, let us go with him and die. We're called to follow Jesus and to be born again, to be a new creation, to let go of the past, to die to the old and be born to the new. Thomas unknowingly speaks the whole gospel. Come, let us go with him and die. But Thomas isn't really understanding everything yet, but this shows he's all in. He is engaged with life. He's begun the journey towards his destiny. He's all in. That's chapter 11. Then in chapter 14, Thomas says to Jesus, "I don't know the way." He's confused. He doesn't have the code yet. He doesn't have an interpretation of life. He's confused, and he says it so plaintively to Jesus, I don't know the way. And then Jesus turns to him, looks him right in the eye, and says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. You might not remember that line is spoken to Thomas. You might not remember that. And we use that line so much to lift up the superiority of Christianity, as if Jesus was talking about religion. He wasn't talking about religion at all. He's not talking about superiority between religions. He has before him someone who is lost, and he's trying to stay focused. This way of mine, of gentleness and sacrifice and love and humility, this is the code. This is the way. It's a beautiful pastoral moment to Thomas. And so Thomas is given the code, the way to interpret life in a way that would fulfill his destiny. That's chapter 14. But life is hard. We lose our hold on the truth. And by chapter 20, life is confusing. We lose our vision, our clarity. By chapter 20, it's Thomas. This is the scene you might remember, the doubting Thomas scene. It's Thomas that says, well, I'm not going to believe, in the resurrection unless I can see him and touch him. And then you remember Jesus appears and offers to Thomas to have him touch his wounds. And then Thomas makes the highest acclamation of the gospel. He says, do you remember? My Lord, my God. You see, Thomas now has that way of interpreting life. He has the code. If you see love at the essence of all things, if you try to live with a gentleness and a self-sacrifice, you will fulfill the destiny of your fullness. Thomas, he took the journey all of us have to take. Bless you on that journey. Bless you. And next week, I'll make an omelet. Amen.